Okay, so the Epstein files are out, and all anyone can talk about are the names. But what if the real story isn't about who is in the files, but how they were released? Let's get into it.
Yeah, that's the number. 3.5 million. That's how many files were dropped in the latest release. It's just a staggering amount of data. Actually, the largest single drop in the history of this whole case. And that's really the heart of what we're going to dig into today, because some sources are suggesting that the way these files came out was a deliberate tactic. And if you look at it from that perspective, well, it changes everything. So here's the game plan for this explainer. First, we'll look at this information flood. Then we'll define a tactic called flooding. After that, we'll uncover what's getting totally missed in all the chaos, investigate the files we can't see, and finally, talk about how to see through all the noise. Right, so the sheer volume here might not be the win for transparency that it looks like. In fact, it actually raises some pretty big questions about the timing and the whole method of this release. And this is the question that shifts our whole focus, right? We stop just consuming the data and start analyzing the strategy behind it. Why dump so much all at once? What's the play here? And that brings us to the central idea of this whole analysis, a specific tool of misdirection known in some circles as flooding. So what is flooding? Well, it's pretty much what it sounds like. It's all about creating space. When the public and the media are totally overwhelmed, just trying to sift through millions of documents, it gives the people in charge room to breathe, and more importantly, control the narrative. Now, here's a related idea you gotta know: malinformation. This one's tricky. It actually weaponizes the truth. It's not about lying. It's about using real, but maybe less important facts to pull everyone's attention away from a much more critical truth. And this right here, this is the end game. Get everyone talking about the names, the photos, the little details we have, so that nobody thinks to ask about the stories being buried or the information that's still being hidden.
Okay, so let's see how this actually plays out in the real world. Let's look at what some are claiming is being completely, totally overlooked because of this information flood.
Now, what's really fascinating here is the pacing. Just look at this timeline. For years, you had this slow, gradual release of files, a little trickle. And then all of a sudden, bam, a massive explosion of documents. This sudden shift in strategy is really the key. I mean, this comparison really just lays it all out, doesn't it? It took 5 whole years to carefully review and release about 300,000 files. Then, somehow, more than 10 times that amount got approved and dumped in about 30 days. That radical speedup is what's fueling this whole argument that this was a deliberate flood, not some careful, transparent release. So what's getting buried in all this? Well, here's a pretty huge headline that seems to have just vanished in the noise. The story of Bill and Hillary Clinton being held in contempt of Congress, specifically in relation to this investigation. This is a direct quote from a letter the Clintons reportedly sent. They were essentially refusing to testify and basically framing it as some kind of political fight. And this was the official, bipartisan response. I mean, think about that. A former president and a former Secretary of State held in contempt of Congress. That's a massive story. But with millions of files to look through, it barely made a ripple. All right, and the second major story that's being completely overlooked is the release of unredacted names of alleged victims, a lot of whom were minors, by the way, all without their consent. Now, this isn't just some clerical error. The source argues it's a symptom of a much bigger problem. It suggests the review process wasn't really focused on protecting victims or preserving criminal details, but on something else entirely. And that led to this just outrageous breach of privacy. And this brings us to what might be the most crucial part of this entire story: the files that haven't been released at all. 2.5 million. While everyone is completely distracted by the 3.5 million files we did get, this is the number of files that are still, to this day, completely sealed. And that's the key word right there, from the Department of Justice itself: never. This isn't a temporary thing. This is a permanent sealing of a massive, massive trove of information. So the DOJ is given 3 official justifications: really sensitive, horrible images, material that's part of an ongoing investigation, and information that could jeopardize national security. Now, each one of those is serious for sure, but they're also incredibly broad and just kind of lumped together. And this is the unanswered question, isn't it? Are 90% of these files horrible images that nobody should ever see? Absolutely possible. Or are 90% of them tied to national security and ongoing investigations into some very powerful people? The fact that we don't have a breakdown here is, well, it's deafening. So what can we take away from all this? Well, we can use this whole case as a kind of lens. It really gives us a framework for thinking critically about how information is presented to us. And that's really the ultimate takeaway here. The next time a massive story breaks with this overwhelming flood of information, ask yourself not just what are they telling me, but also what are they trying to distract me from, because that is where the real story often lies.